There's a lot of game franchises that really never seem to go away, like Legend of Zelda, Final Fantasy, Pokemon, Mario Kart, any Mario game, basically. I guess, Fire Emblem and Dragon Quest to an extent. Geez, what other ones could I think of? Well, I mean, successful franchises like Halo or other good first-person shooters like Call of Duty. These are seem to be franchises that every single time a year goes by or a new console generation comes out, there's always another installment of that game. And I was kind of wondering why that was, beyond the fact that they make money, because obviously that is the main reason. It is a business after all. But I also wonder if on the side of that, it doesn't go a little bit deeper, as I tend to think about these things. And I feel like there's two sides to it. On the one hand, I think it's innovation. You look at a series like, say, Grand Theft Auto. Every single time a new game has come out, from the first one right up until 5 and all the DLCs and little episodic ones in between, the game's improved. Whether or not the story was good or better than the last one, the mechanics always improved. The expansiveness of the world, the things you could do, the way you could interact, the colors, the textures, the voices. Interacting with that environment constantly got better. So each one in that way is kind of justified because you're very confident. Obviously, one could always be so bad it kind of becomes a black mark on a series or a franchise. But with a game series like Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead Redemption, even though that's only had 2 games so far, you've got this track record which gives you pretty solid confidence that each installment is going to improve on the last one. Maybe not necessarily from a narrative storytelling point of view, but mechanically, the way it works and the world you get to interact in is going to be better than the previous one. Of course, we've all got our favorites, but you get what I mean. Games like that, or games like Final Fantasy, where they'll change up the battle mechanics, they'll change up the way you get magic to cast spells, they'll change up the timing, they'll change up the entire combat system so that you're not really dictating the attacks yourself. You're setting up a sequence and you're countering, kind of like in Final Fantasy 13. Games like, say, Fire Emblem, where they're constantly refining the combat, the interactions and relationships between characters. And the stories are always pretty good too. Pokemon, where they're just basically adding more and more Pokemon to their litany of Pokemon, changing up the Pokedex, changing up the environment, changing up how you go about fighting, how you use items, how you evolve the Pokemon, how you can improve their abilities or your relationship with your roster, all those kinds of things. And then games like, say, Call of Duty or first-person shooters in general, pretty consistently across the board, they get better, whether or not they're part of the same franchise. They all seem to be refining the timing, the way, the mechanics of the gunplay, the tactics, the environments, how you interact with them, whether or not they're destructible, things like that. Those are the sort of elements where the continuation of a franchise seems very justified to me, because it's not just a matter of this consistently makes money. It's this consistently makes money. Again, it's a business, but also we look at the last one. We see what we did. We see what worked. We see what we could have done better, and we see what didn't work at all, what people liked, what people didn't. With the next one, I think we can outdo ourselves, and it's constantly pushing that line to try to make it better and better and better. And as I've said before, I think that's a great carrot to have at the end of the stick, because you're chasing perfection and you're never going to reach it, because there will always be something that could be improved, or from another person's perspective or how they choose to critique what you produce, it won't be perfect for them. And I don't think it could even be perfect for you, because like I said, you'll always find that one thing where you're like, oh, if we'd only done this, it would have been perfect. But then even if you did, you'd go, now this isn't so good. You see what I mean? It's this constant process of refinement that never reaches conclusion. But that's really satisfying, because along the way, you end up creating better and better and better things. The side of it where I feel like perhaps it's not justified is when it's you're continuing a franchise for the sake of continuing a franchise. in a way, to me, seems like an inability to let go and move on. Like, we always need to have a Final Fantasy in whatever console generation there is, or maybe more than one. There always has to be... I'm trying to think of series that have really kind of like dipped. Well, I mean, they haven't done Ultima in a while, but there's a good example. Like, there always needs to be a Warcraft or a Starcraft, a Diablo. Those kinds of games. And I'm not saying that those are necessarily bad games, but when you are just continuing a franchise because you always want to have it there, you never want to really let it die or let it lie. Like, it's had its time, and now you need to let it go. And maybe not forever, but maybe you leave that franchise alone for a solid decade before you come back to it. And because, like, maybe the creative well for what that series can offer for the time has been tapped. It's run dry. And anything else you bring to the table is either not going to live up to expectations or it's going to underperform where the previous one did well. And if you keep doing that, you're going to suck away so much nostalgic value and passion for that franchise that by the time you do create something good, nobody might pay attention to it because they've had the last 5 ones just weren't any good. And so you run the risk of that. And I also think there's something kind of nice about letting a franchise go. Again, ignoring the business side. Let's say you've done 6 games in a series and they've all been really, really good. I'm a pretty firm believer in that regard, and I'd have to think deeper about expanding that to like life itself, but kind of ending on a high note. You've created something that is beloved. It's done incredibly well. Maybe it's even refined and improved and elevated the genre. Maybe it's time to stop and try something new because you've done so well. Do you really want to run the risk of making the next one just because you want to continue the franchise and thereby roll the dice on whether or not it's going to be better or worse? I mean, obviously, if you're confident enough that it will be better, have at it. But if you're just continuing it for the sake of, that doesn't really seem like it's got enough substance to stick and hold water. You know what I mean? I'm wondering if there are not a lot of franchises out there that wouldn't have been better served in the memory of gamers had they not been ended years before, so that instead of someone saying like, oh, number 7 or number 9 or number 10, those were the great ones, but number 13, holy crap, what were they thinking? And then part 2 and then part 3, oh, it just kept getting worse. If you'd ended it way before all of that, if people wouldn't have just been like, you remember playing that series? Man, that was my favorite. I used to play that all the time in high school. Yeah, me too. Man, they did really well. Yeah. Really wish they'd make another one. Like, end it in a way that people remember it fondly and they want you to make another one. Even if you never do, you've created that fandom, that nostalgia, that love for the game that goes beyond just enjoying the experience. It had an impact on people. And as best you can, because again, everybody's different, it doesn't have a sort of black mark generated by the sheer fact that you kept pumping out one after the other just for the sake of doing that and not because it added anything new or continued a story or just expanded on an idea that was only touched on in another game. If it's just being put out for the sake of, I don't know if that's good enough. But anyway, I think I've rambled on enough. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this, of course. And if you agree, disagree, or if you have a completely different view that I haven't even considered at all, would love for you to share it in the comments below. Until next time, my name's Rye. You guys take care of yourselves.